So we had a look at theory and an example of a theoretical look at how we would express hierarchy. I'm going to talk us through an example of something practical. In this case, we're going to take a look at a recipe. So contrast is a great way to achieve this visual hierarchy, as you can see here. And like I was mentioning in the earlier part of the slides, change one parameter, give one visual cue, see if it works, and then refine. So that particular piece, that was from Bring Her Elements of Type, and he reminds us to change one thing at a time and see where it gets you. Is there enough contrast? Is it clear to the viewer what the function is? If not, add another layer of redundancy. But don't just throw on 10 layers of redundancy, make things really outrageous just for the sake of it, because then it might actually confuse things more. See how much you have to change in order to achieve what you're looking to achieve. So let's look at an example. Now, this is from a type primer by John Kane. Now, he kind of says something that we mentioned earlier when I assigned that first text project, is that you need to understand the material in order to make sense out of it for the reader. So you have to understand what conventions they might be looking for, what's the next most important piece of information. So we're going to form this hierarchy using content. So we need to know what the content demands, and then we're going to apply the form to it in order to get to what the content demands. So you have to know what kinds of information you're dealing with in order to give that visual hierarchy. So let's take a look at this recipe for an apple tart. So it's pretty straightforward. This is just text laid out, everything's set the same, no differentiation between the various levels of information or what the information even is about. Is it ingredients? Is it a direction? So we're going to take that and we're going to kind of work through some various versions to see what the clearest presentation is. So first off, he's broken it down in terms of the levels of information and what the types of information are. So we've got a title, we've got a subtitle, and you've got body. But the body isn't all the same. You've got ingredients, you've got oven temperature instructions, which is said once and then never again. And then we have the actual step-by-step instructions. So we need to think about, well, our ingredients set the same as your instructions. How do we break these things down so that they make the most sense? So here's his first option, using one typeface and one size throughout. So in this case, he's using spacing, he's using alignment in order to pull out the various parts of the instructions. And so here, he separated the ingredients from the steps that they go with. So that way, we're using left align with a right ragged. So left align, right rag throughout. And he's using where the alignment is in order to make it clear what's ingredients, what's not. But there's no variation in text size. Now we can see here that he's using a 3-column grid in order to do that. So you can see one column, and then this actually takes up the space of 2 of these columns. Now, if you look at that, it's a little bit unclear. The way the space is, there's not really a strong alignment between these ingredients and these directions. You more or less get the idea just based on where the lines are, but it could be clearer. So option 2, he's starting to refine a little bit. He's still keeping one typeface and one size, but instead of everything being flush left, he's got the ingredients flush right, ragged left, and these directions, the kind of longer text, that's set flush left, ragged right, way that is more natural for us to read, but is more closely aligning those pieces of information, the ingredients, with the directions that they go with. So as you can see here, you've got this kind of rule that runs through and everything lines up along that kind of invisible line down the middle. And in fact, visually, your eye almost fills that line in for itself. Now, he's starting to play with things a little bit more. He's gone back to the first one and said, well, what if instead I start bringing in italics and I make the title a different size. So he's basically said, okay, I'm not particularly happy with option 2, but I feel like option 1 is still not right. So how am I going to let people know about subheads? So the subhead is, this is the shell. Here's the directions for the shell. Here are the directions for the apple. Here are the directions for the pastry cream. And he pulls it out by using this italics. Everything else is the same, but we're starting to see the subheads more. They're starting to do their function more. And we know that this is an apple tart. So you're not going to waste your time reading the directions for an apple tart if you want an apple crumble. And he's also made it clear that this is really important, that the ones with the asterisks need to be as cold as possible. So you're starting to take 1. He's like, okay, I'm happier with 1 than 2, but it needs to be pushed more. I need to add more levels. Now he's decided to refine things even more. Again, we're still starting with that base, but he's pulled out from having the 3 columns. He's decided, I want to pull out the oven instructions separately. It's preheating. It needs to be done before anything else. I want to pull that out. So he's pulled that out on the right. He's also decided that the subheads need more punch. He's happy with the header, but the subheads need to be differentiated more. So he's changed the font to make those a sans serif while the rest is serif, and he's made them bold. So here we've got form and weight reinforcing the hierarchy of header subhead content. And we do still have the italic for the note in the margin there, which again is a single signifier to let people know this is important. Now, it says here this is a 7-column format, and you go, well, I see 1, 2, 3. But how we've determined the size of this is actually to subdivide the rest of the page. As we can see here, we actually have the ingredients taking up 2 of these. So this is 1, the preheating is 1 column. Now, none of the ingredients here span the entirety of these 2 columns, but that's fine. They've been given that space. And then we've got our body text taking up 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. And so that's clearly the most important because it takes up the most space. But by separating out the preheating, you've said, okay, it's the smallest, so it's less important, but it does deserve its own column. So we can see then the refinement from the 3 columns to the 7, and how just kind of, again, if you kind of squint, you can see, even when it's kind of blurry, how different aspects are given importance by where they're placed on the page. So this is important to think about when you are laying out hierarchy. How do you make it clear? If you are approaching this cold, you have no idea what it is that you're looking at, you want to make it as clear as possible to the reader what it is and what's important. I can much more clearly see, this is an apple tart. I've got different pieces of that apple tart that I need to put together, and I've got 4 different things I need to do. Okay, I've got ingredients for each of those 4 things, and I've got preheating for 2 of them. And so this allows me to, without being able to read any of the actual information in depth, I have a better sense of how I'm going to approach my task than I do with option 1 that he started off with. So this is an example of how you change one thing, you assess whether or not it works. In the case of option 2, he decides to go back to the beginning, but you keep refining, you keep seeing, okay, if I change one thing, is it enough? Do I need to change it again in order to get to an end result that communicates far more effectively than the original did? We're going to take a look at captions specifically in the next video. And again, we're going to look at a case study breaking down. In this case, it's going to be breaking down a newspaper.